Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chantel Goss, and I'm the commercial manager with Locks Electrical. And we're very proud to sponsor this keynote luncheon as part of MINEx 2026. For those of you who may not know us, Locks has been in business since 1948, with operations in Lab West dating back to the early 90s. We are a Newfoundland and Labrador, majority women, and Indigenous-owned general contractor, and we've had the privilege of playing a long-standing and active role in the mining industry. For decades, Locks has delivered electrical, instrumentation, transmission, substation, and civil work for clients in the mining, utilities, and industrial sectors across Newfoundland and Labrador and beyond. With a long-standing presence in Lab West, we're proud to support complex projects in some of the most demanding operating environments in the province. We believe strongly in building and maintaining more than infrastructure. We're committed to long-term partnerships, local employment, community investment, and doing work the right way. We're intentional about building opportunities for people, investing in workforce development, supporting diverse talent, and creating meaningful careers in the communities where we operate. A strong focus on safety, reliability, and local capacity building underpins everything that we do, all while striving to work alongside Indigenous partners to support long-term employment, training, and shared prosperity. Giving back, creating opportunities, and supporting sustainable regional development are core to who we are as a company, and that's why we're so happy to sponsor this event. Today, we're happy to introduce today's keynote speaker, CEO of the Purposeful Group. Chelsea MacNeil is the founder and CEO of the Purposeful Group and a community development strategist with experience supporting communities, governments, and industry partners to design sustainable, place-based solutions. Her work focuses on bridging public, private, and community sectors to advance strategies that strengthen community well-being while supporting long-term economic resilience. Chelsea specializes in weaving relationships, aligning systems, and helping communities dream, build, and manage initiatives they can truly own. She brings a practical, community-driven approach to projects involving regional development, housing strategy, workforce readiness, mobility, and social infrastructure, supporting communities to move from vision to implementation in realistic and inclusive ways. Please give a warm welcome to Chelsea MacNeil.
All right, thanks so much. Really appreciate that lovely introduction. And before I get started, can folks hear me well? Down in the back, everyone? All right, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here at MINEx this year. And a huge thanks to the organizers, to Lydia, to Dave, and the whole team. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you today. Over the past few years, I've had the opportunity and absolute privilege to work here in Labrador West. First on seniors housing, which everyone is certainly well attuned to the challenges here in for seniors housing, and then subsequently workforce housing and housing as a general challenge in this particular community. And more recently, I've been invited to work on community development more broadly, and you'll hear more about that project after my talk. Across my career, I've had the absolute privilege of working in communities across Canada, and I often point to Labrador West as an example of what becomes possible when industry, when government, and community work in tandem, not just through the good times and the boom times, but over the long term. This is a place where people work, community life, public services, and local identity has evolved alongside industrial development for decades. And that history really matters, not only for what that history represents, but for what it makes possible when we dream of what's next. Today, I'd like to focus my talk on a singular idea, and it's one that I've been a bit obsessed with for about the last year, and mostly inspired by the work here. And that concept is endurance, not resilience. Resilience often has roots in trauma, whether that's the loss of an industry, whether that's a loss in a community, and it's the toughness and the scrappiness that comes out of that trauma. But today I really want to hone in on what it means to be more deliberate, what it means to not simply survive shocks, but what it means to intentionally build. Endurance as a concept really allows communities and industries to plan, to invest, and to govern with the confidence that it requires to think around long time horizons. It turns cycles into trajectories. It determines whether the value created today compounds over time or dissipates. Mining plays an absolute central role in that question in this community. And I would argue resource sectors across Canada play a critical role in this conversation. Not because mining can do everything. It can't, and it probably shouldn't. But because it shapes the conditions over which everything happens. In recent years, mining conversations in the resource sector, it's become more complex. We expect a lot of our industries. The sector has been asked to deliver economic value, environmental performance, workforce development, supply chain resilience, community benefit, often simultaneously and often under great uncertainty. These are not unreasonable expectations. I just need to acknowledge that they're challenging ones. And sometimes when we look at community and community benefits, and we're negotiating community benefits, we're working with intentions, and that tension doesn't leave space for intention, and that becomes problematic from the start. But if we're shifting about how we think about community investment, how we actually move forward with coordination, and we think about time horizons differently, all of a sudden community benefit agreements are no longer the add-on. The coordination is no longer a courtesy. When we design benefits, we need to take that long view, and that is what we consider to be enduring, durable communities. Not that people react, and not that companies and industry is required to just react, that we're thinking through what it means to work together. Endurance in practice is absolutely designed. It doesn't happen by accident. In rural and remote Scotland, check. Okay, good. All right. I'm going to hold this. Okay, folks, we're back up and going. Thanks so much. Sorry about the break. I didn't know the electricity problem was that bad. I was waiting for the microphone. I had a lot of time to come up with that joke. Folks, before we had that little interlude, I wanted to talk a little bit about some work I've done in rural and remote Scotland. When we look to our friends across the pond, one of the things that is really unique about Scotland, which you might know or might not know, is that rural Scotland actually powers most of the UK in rural and remote communities. And when we look at community integration with industry, we can look to our friends in Scotland to see how they've done work in pioneering long-term community benefit models that provide those predictable returns over the lifetime of projects directly into community. Rather than one-off contributions, these funds are designed to support housing, training, energy efficiency, and other locally defined priorities year over year. Their industries working together to really think about growth with the benefit of many. In these examples, they're exploring different ways for industry and communities to work together, and for that investment certainly to be coordinated with a prioritization of a future orientation. Now, can't confuse this with charity. These are strategic investments. It's structured and tied to long-lived infrastructure and aligned with community plans. I want to point out a great example of community development in this room, and if you're fortunate enough to hear Andy speak with Nunaccord today, they're an incredible example of operating businesses whose profits are reinvested back into community priorities, but they also invest in the development of economic opportunities and play together with industry. And community ownership and investment, they do in spades. That value that is generated is really about the people who work and live and invest in their communities. The last example I'll offer as an example of communities who've worked in the context of resource development with incredible returns to community is that of the story of Cape Breton. So folks who are familiar with Cape Breton's history know that following the decline of coal, poverty was of a main central concern to certainly those experiencing it, but also those trying to support solutions. And the best solution came directly out of the community itself. New Dawn Enterprises became a new engine for a different kind of regional well-being. It's Canada's oldest community development corporation, and now Future Forward, since 1975, has been operating businesses that serve market gaps and subsequently reinvest back into their community through affordable housing, childcare services, home care services, arts and community infrastructure, and they were the main driver of what created the continuity in a post-industrialization of that region and into where Cape Breton is today. Across all of these examples, the lesson's pretty consistent. When industry, community, and institutions align with shared purpose and long-term revenue models, value circulates locally. And when value circulates locally, that's when endurance becomes possible. So we know that mining has always generated value through jobs, wages, infrastructure, public revenues, their reinvestments back into community. But that long-term community value that has to operate in tandem is what we're talking about. It's not simply what is produced, certainly, but it's about what remains. How is it usable, adaptable, and anchored in the region over time? So those things are like transferable skills in our workforce, businesses that can scale beyond a single project, infrastructure that offers multiple different uses, and institutions that can prevail amongst or in spite of cycles. When investments move in parallel rather than isolation, value compounds. And when they don't, opportunities can leak. So one of the things, and all of this is great to say, but what's the cost of doing nothing is usually how I think about things. And what we know is that misalignment is really expensive. There's a financial case saying if we are not operating as a collective unit with shared principles, the costs will be borne by not only industry and society, but also in terms of future value. And when a workforce planning is disconnected from housing, opportunity leaks. It's expensive. When training timelines don't match project needs, that can be expensive. And when suppliers can't scale because they can't access capital, standards and demand aren't synchronized, it's expensive. And individually, these might seem manageable. You can create really quick strategies to help in the short term, cover that up with a Band-Aid, help catalyze, solve for today's problem. However, collectively, the impact is actually about confidence. And it's the confidence that is required to actually see what a future could hold. And so that confidence ends up being foundational to the concept of endurance. What happens when communities hesitate to invest, when businesses hesitate to expand, and when people hesitate to stay? So that alignment isn't about any one organization or any one voice having control. It is everything about coordination and ensuring that effort reinforces effort, even when the roles differ. And I just repeat, the effort reinforcing effort is such a critical component to the regional development of any region, and certainly of this area in particular. I would invite you, certainly with these things in mind, over dinner and conversations with colleagues, with community partners, to explore what's possible when we think about that shared responsibility and what the compounding value of effort on effort really looks like. There's another layer here that's often overlooked, and coordination is a technical thing. Like, it is hard to get everybody in line in a room. We just need to get everybody coordinated, moving the same way. Fancy strategy document, you hire a consultant like me who comes in and says, ta-da, here's a beautiful strategy and then everyone's gonna win. It's perfect. It's way more than that, because actually at the heart of it all, it's cultural. And I want to talk for a second about scarcity, but not for very long because I don't want to give it too much oxygen. But the concept of scarcity isn't about having less. It's the psychological lens that makes people focus on the limits of what's missing, what's at risk, and who might lose. When resources and opportunities feel scarce, the attention then subsequently narrows, stress increases, decision-making shifts towards the short term, and trust becomes fragile. And that makes coordination really challenging, and it makes collaboration almost impossible. Abundance, by contrast, and abundance is a word that I always roll my own eyes when I say it, because it sounds like naive optimism. It sounds like, a utopian sort of situation. However, abundance is actually a very hard thing to retain and maintain. When we think about abundance, it's around alignment. It's around opportunity expanding rather than shrinking. An abundance mindset widens your field of view. All of a sudden you can see a heck of a lot more, and it encourages and makes the space for the long-term planning that's required to really lift communities forward. If scarcity fragments alignment, then abundance actually strengthens the alignment. And that's where the idea of a coalition of the willing comes from. And you might have heard our Prime Minister speak about the coalition of the willing in terms of a geopolitical sense. But it's something in the community sector that often we talk about. And don't discount the power of when organizations and leaders who voluntarily align around shared objectives, they choose cooperation, and they pursue long-term visioning. That's where the magic happens. Here in Lab West, the clearest example of this, and I give all the kudos in the world to the Coalition of the Willing of the Labrador West Alliance. We see industry, government, municipalities, regional partners that are coordinating and talking about these challenges. And with that type of conversation creates the space. It creates the space and the energy. And we heard it yesterday and this morning, that there is a call to action. And that call to action, to me, is the example of what abundance really looks like. Now you just need the activators, the durable community infrastructure to action these types of opportunity that will really make endurance possible. Just to talk briefly about investment, because it's critical to endurance. From an investment perspective, investment really has to be quality investment. It's not just how much capital flows, but how it's sequenced, how it's aligned, and how it's governed. A high quality investment reduces that friction, lowers the long-term risk, and strengthens coordination. And low quality investment is well intentioned, but it can create fragments, and it can fragment our systems. This certainly matters for companies. I know even my own company, and that high quality investment is critical for us to grow. However, it rings true to nonprofits, to community organizations, and also the types of capital that are available for businesses to grow and scale. You know, alignment doesn't require a single authority or a grand redesign. I don't want anyone to leave with that idea. It does require some hard work. If we think about the practical applications or the byproducts or outputs that come with alignment, we're actually talking about supplier development linked with real procurement pathways. That's an example of good alignment. Community investment along with long-term regional priorities, that's an example of great alignment. Procurement that's connected to local capacity and sustainable growth, excellent example of a byproduct or output that can happen when alignment is real. When we think about the community endurance, communities retaining agency to be able to determine what's important to them is critical to informing that alignment. You can't lose sight of what communities think, feel, need, and how they see the future. And it doesn't happen with one round of consultations and a conversation, and it doesn't happen with a speech like mine. It really only happens with sustained effort. Endurance, when people have the skills to adapt, when the institutions coordinate and money flows locally, that's when we see it. A word on, as I wrap up, I want to talk specifically about MINEx and why conferences like this really matter. Not because what's discussed on stage or announced, but because of what comes after this. This room here contains operators, suppliers, policymakers, educators, community leaders, and you guys represent systems that make this community special, systems that hold this community's, also the fragility of communities in your hands. I always think of systems in relation to plumbing. So this analogy probably works in this room. Some rooms it doesn't. So if you think of a system like plumbing, no matter how complicated the building, no matter how complicated the system, water needs to flow seamlessly or we're going to have a big mess in our hands. And I will leave that to your imagination. And the messes that cause massive issues. So you have a pipe burst, the water floods a room. Or, alternatively, systems can have slow leaks. They can be more insidious. They can creep into places like culture, like confidence, impede growth in places that you don't even see. And if you're going to work as a system, you have to do the work that preserves it. You have to do the work on the system. Each of you control part of that system, and endurance does not come from one specific decision. It comes from what happens when those decisions line up, when honesty and clarity let the water flow freely, and when we all have the same objectives, that can we be confident that we're moving forward collectively. So let me close with an invitation. As you move through this conference, ask 3 questions. Is investment reinforcing long-term capacity? Or is it short-term output? So are we solving a problem that is short-term, and are we only sort of solving the problem? Or are we thinking about the root causes and the future we want? Are we encouraging coordination and how we operate, how we invite people, how we look at around our tables and see, do we have strong representation? So are we encouraging and inviting that coordination, or are we thinking about limiting the space? Are we listening? Are we sharing? Are we working hard with abundance at our core, to our belly buttons? Or are we falling victim of what sometimes is a little easy, which is the scarcity perspective? Endurance is not accidental. It's built when people in capital and institutions move with purpose and move together. And with the right alignment, I think Labrador West continues to lead in the resource conversation, but also not just here at home in Newfoundland Labrador, but across the country, to see how resource communities can really rise to not only the occasion, but rise to the future we all want. And not just for the next cycle, not just to solve today's problems, but to think about what tomorrow really might actually offer us when we work together. Thanks very much.